Welcome. This is the 2022 State of the Legal Hiring Market, which is a webinar we've been doing every year for as long as I can remember. And typically, this is a very long webinar. Today, I don't know that I want to make it as long as it probably should be. But there's an article that's going to go on the BCG site, and it will be there in the next couple of days. And so most of the information that I'm going to cover here will be on there as well. I'll try to get through most of this as quickly as possible. This is over 200 slides. I'm not going to go through all the slides. I'll share kind of the highlights of it with you guys and the girls. And then after, I will take questions about the content of the presentation. But the article will be online. And the important thing about this is that there's a lot of charts and other information that are important for you to review as part of this, and we'll show you where the demand is in the market. And these are the topics that we'll be covering today. The legal jobs that grew. The first Bureau of Labor Statistics report was out in August 2021. So we'll go over that. And we'll go over the hiring and interview statistics for BCG Attorney Search. What's important to understand about our interviewing and hiring statistics is they're a very good insight of the market. And the reason is because at any one time, we're typically working with over 10,000 people looking for jobs. And so that's all over the country and then in different international markets as well. But because we're working with so many people, we have a very good insight into what's going on in the market by the number of people that are getting interviewed at different practice areas and the number of people that are getting hired. And I would argue because we're a placement firm and not a recruiting firm, we have a far better insight into the market probably than any comparable group of people in the world, because that 10,000 number, your average recruiter may work with 10 people or 15 people searching for jobs. And our company was working consistently with over 10,000, maybe even as of today, over 15. So we have a lot of people that we're working with, and we have a lot of employees and artificial intelligence and so forth that we use to track down jobs and also to understand what's going on in the market. So the information that I'm giving you is really information that is good information. It's not necessarily anecdotal, meaning 15 years ago, I might have said, well, corporate always gets active when the economy is good. These are actual information about what's happening for hundreds, if not thousands of people in different practice areas and who's getting interviews and who's not. So I think it's very interesting, and we'll go over real briefly, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but we'll go over each practice area. We'll spend a little bit more time on litigation because that's the most popular. And then we'll show you the placements where there's been the most growth or decline. And that's actually very interesting. And before I talk about it, most of our growth really has been in consumer-facing practice areas. So those are things like workers' compensation and other things where a lot of placements have happened where people typically wouldn't even think that firms there would use recruiters. And what's funny about what we do is there's always, among young attorneys, not older ones, but among young attorneys, there's always this idea that, recruiters, if I use them in my job searches, it's not always for smaller firms, won't help me. Actually, it helps a lot more with smaller firms than any type of firm, because that's where most of the placements have been happening with smaller firms. And large firms obviously hire a lot of people too, but at the same time, the small firm market is just absolutely gigantic. And there's a huge demand, smaller to mid-sized firms for people. We'll also talk about regional differences. Obviously, you have the coast, but you have other areas, and I'm sure you've been aware of, are growing, like Texas and Florida, because a lot of people are moving to those states for political and also taxation reasons. And then we'll talk about niche practice areas, and then just some other kind of big practice areas like M&A and what's happened there, bankruptcy, tax and estate planning, employment, and then just some outlooks for what I see are going to be the top practice areas. So the first thing is just that in terms of the job search market, in terms of what's going on and in terms of your marketability right now, there's really never been a better time to look for a position. I've been at this in terms of for almost a quarter of a century. And in terms of what I've seen, I've never really seen a market that's as good as the market is right now. This is an exceptional market. The other thing is at BCG, Attorney Search and LawCross, and then also other sites like whether it's LinkedIn or that, people are going to find you if you're interested in looking for a job. So having your resume in these sites and then getting job alerts and things is very important, because you're going to learn about a lot of opportunities that normally you wouldn't. What tends to happen is there's kind of two types of markets. One of them is when it's very employer driven, where everybody's trying to get jobs and it's very difficult to get jobs. And the others when it's candidate driven, where there's a lot of opportunities for people. And this is a candidate driven market. So if you're a candidate, you actually have you're in a better marketing position for employers that are good fits for you than you otherwise would be. So that makes it much easier for you to get a position than it would otherwise. Now, of course, there's different types of attorneys and so forth. But if you're trying to move up and work at a better firm, you probably have a very good opportunity to do that right now. You may not be able to move from a consumer-facing firm to representing Google, but you can definitely move from a consumer-facing firm to one where you're representing small companies, or a firm where you're representing small companies to one where you're representing mid-sized companies. And if you're working at a firm where you're representing mid-sized companies, you can move to a firm where you're representing larger companies and mid-sized companies. So that's the kind of movement that tends to happen when the market's very good. And it's a very good opportunity for anybody to move. And last year at our company, we made hundreds of placements, and most of the people that were placed were actually moving to better firms. And so you can move to better firms. You can also, if you're working at a small company, you can move to a larger company. If you're working for the government, you can move to a larger or more important government role. There's just a lot of opportunity out there. And you can get a sense of kind of the way the market is by just going out and trying to go out to eat. I came back from vacation, and a lot of the restaurants they had nobody to serve people. And then when I came back to Los Angeles, it was the same thing. I'd go to restaurants, and I went into a giant family restaurant, and they only had one server in the afternoon. And so everyone had to wait because there was only one person there. So this is a very good market for lots of people, especially in large markets. Firms are very eager to hire people, and it's a very good time to move up if you're unhappy with their situation. And the other thing is that there's a lot of people that now have the ability to work remotely, and that's a very good thing. So you should not be just applying to firms in your home market. You should be applying to other markets, and a lot of people will hire you to work in other markets. I just hired an attorney to work at our company. I think she's in Brooklyn, and she can work remotely. And we interviewed probably 25 people for her job, and she was the best person, and we hired her, and she can represent us there. It's fine. But one thing I would recommend is this is just for your own sake to get jobs. I would recommend uploading your resume to different websites, whether it's BCG or Law Crossing or LinkedIn, just to make sure you understand the things that are going on in the market. And if you upload your resume to BCG, we will always send you positions and also firms that we think would be a good fit for you, regardless of whether or not they have jobs. It's just fun to look at. People like getting those. And we have, tens of thousands of people that we tell about different firms we think are good fits for them. So that would be something that you might enjoy. And then the other thing is, right now, the statistics are 1 in 10 attorneys is actively seeking job opportunities, meaning that they're approving firms, or they're, applying to jobs when they receive them very regularly from job alerts and so forth. But also nearly half of all lawyers report that they're open to new job opportunities. And so that's actually a very good thing too, as well. And also, I think a lot of people, especially young attorneys, do feel very overworked, even when they're working from home. And so the market is definitely exploding. And these are just some statistics. I'm sure every day when I read the paper, I read about people resigning from their jobs and so forth. But we've really seen very high resignation rates in people between the ages of 35 and 45, and attorneys. A lot of people in July quit their jobs, and so there's just been a lot of openings and so forth. If you look at Law Crossing, for example, right now we have, I think, over 100,000 attorney openings. Different job boards have for different amounts, and there's literally, it's not dozens, it's hundreds of jobs posted every day, and it's very, very busy out there. And the other thing too is there's a lot of money going around. So there's a lot of investment being made in the market. So there's money is very cheap and interest rates are low. The stock market's doing well. So companies have a lot of money to invest, and people have a lot of money to invest in companies and to give new companies and so forth. So there's a lot of in-house positions as well. And growing companies also have the money to hire law firms. And so it is a very good time to hire people. People are resigning from companies en masse and so forth. And it's just a very active market. We've had at our company at BCG, the recruiters did very well. A majority of them did twice as many placements last year as they did the previous year, which should strike you. It's not that they're very skilled and so forth, and we have very good technology, but at the same time, that has made a big difference in terms of it should show you that how good the market is. And then I think that lawyers are much more open to leaving and looking for jobs than they used to be. the market used to be, even when I started, it was rare for people to look for jobs right away. And then if you go back even further in the 1980s and 1970s, it was almost unheard of for attorneys to look for jobs beyond their current firm, and everything has changed. So one thing I just would recommend, though, if you haven't done it, is regardless of the situation you're in, you are likely to see positions that interest you, that you are likely to learn of things that may be better than where you're at. And I certainly believe that it's a smart thing to stay with a current employer if things are working out and you have a future. But if you are interested in getting exposed to potentially more sophisticated work, or a firm that has a better opportunity, or an employer with a better opportunity, it is important to make sure that you have your resume updated. And there really is nothing wrong with sending your resume to different places where, if you feel, just to learn about jobs instead of job alerts and so forth. And because there are many life-changing opportunities out there. And we have these, when we have our meetings with the people that work here, and people, a lot of our own employees are moved to tears in many cases, just by how significantly people's lives can change and how quickly they can change. And so it's something to look at very closely. So even if you're not active in the legal market, you should understand that this is one of the most active hiring markets probably in history. And it's important to have a good resume. If you're a corporate attorney or you transactional work, I highly recommend getting a deal sheet done, and to reach out to old people that you may have worked with in the past if you're interested in doing different things, but just be ready to understand that you do have a lot of opportunity right now, regardless of what may have happened to you and what you may believe in the past. I think that what happens, a lot of people that start their their careers in recessions, or when the market's not that good, or then when they come out of law school and they have a difficult time finding a job, or they look for a job in a recession, when a good time comes along, they're scared and they don't necessarily think that good things are going to happen. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity out there right now. And I can just tell you that from experience, about there's a ton of things that are happening, and it's a very good market right now. So it's just something I would recommend, just before I get started with everything, just that you be aware of, that you do have a lot of opportunities right now. In most cases, when people don't take advantage of those opportunities, it's their minds that are holding them back, their beliefs about themselves, their beliefs about the market, their preconceptions, and so forth. And keep in mind that you're listening to someone right now that, works with tens of thousands of people looking for positions. And I can tell you that this is a very good market. It's a good market to move up, but it's also a good market if you want to try to get clients and do other things as well. So this is just a report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I don't need to spend a ton of time on it, but it just shows you, the first one came out in August of 2021. There were obviously jobs added. There's more, the market, meaning the market's expanding in terms of its size. And so it's just the whole legal market and the job market is doing well. And that's obviously a good thing. One thing I did want to, and then you can see 74,000 jobs for professional and business services in August, unemployment rates falling, but it was so forth. So there's just quite a bit going on in terms of how the legal market's doing. And one of the things that we've done is we use data science. So it's exciting. We're able to match people with all the firms in the country, and we can obviously see a lot of demand in different areas. And pretty much BCG, we used to be very selective. 20 years ago, the company would only work with the candidates looking to get the best firms and the best jobs. And now the market really, we believe, is open to everyone and to all law firms, small, large, use recruiters to find jobs. And it's honestly, this year was one of the best years of all time. This may not be news that people that everyone believes, but honestly, we've placed people that are in their 70s and more than senior. We've placed people that are 6 months out of law school, or even 3 months out of law school. It doesn't matter really the school you go to. The most important thing really to be marketable in this market is just to make sure you have some sort of skill that you're good at. You do one thing and you do it. It could be anything. It could be trust in estates. It could be a form of litigation. It doesn't matter. One of our recruiters just like the Friday before Christmas or the Thursday made 4 placements. It's just, I think my team, I think made 9 or 10 the week after Christmas. So it's a very active market. And these are not the kind of numbers that you normally hear about this time of year. So the market, very good right now and going into the new year. And the key to that is really knowing where to look. If you've been looking for a position, there may be a lot of stuff that you're doing wrong. You may be only looking at openings in the biggest firms, and you may be coming from a small firm. You may be looking at in-house openings in the biggest companies that are looking for people coming from other big companies, and you're at a law firm or a small company. You may be making mistakes, but if you're looking in the right place, you should be doing very well right now. And the other thing that's very important that I always stress to people is making sure that you're always looking at places that don't have openings. I share the statistic almost every single call that I do and every single webinar. Over 80% of the placements that we make at BCG are at firms that don't currently have openings. And the reason for that is because we know the firms that are interested in people on an ongoing basis. Firms don't always have openings, but the big thing is when you're applying to firms that don't have openings, you're the only applicant. So why would you want to be one of 100 plus applicants or 2 or 3 or 400 applicants for a position when you can be the only person? It seems counterintuitive to some people, but that's just how it works. Most firms are not organized enough to have formal openings, and the biggest ones are, but most of them aren't. And the other thing I would say too, is this a temporary trend in terms of what happened last year? I say no idea, but no, it's not. So the big thing to understand is one reason it's very important that you should probably be active in the market right now is always what goes up goes down. This is every time the market has gotten very good. Right before 2008, it was a great market. And then everything crashed right before the dot-com boom happened, more 1999 to about November of 2000. And then it fell off, the face of the earth. And then everything recovered a little bit. And then you get 2001. So everything goes in waves. And the bigger the wave, meaning the higher the more active things get and the better the market, the worse the fall. So that means you want to be really in a place, I would say, that's right now that's very well managed and you think is going to do well in the future when the economy does slow down, because it will. And I don't know if it's this year. I don't know if it's next year. I'm not an oracle on this, but what I can tell you is that you have a very good opportunity right now to increase your marketability. And law firms that are looking for people right now a lot of them are having a very hard time. We get requests for people all day, every day, and they're so voluminous. It's hard to respond. And we do want people to tell us about their jobs, but there's a lot of places that want people, and you can apply to places, whether or not you're using a recruiter or not. You can just apply to places, or many times regardless of whether they have openings. And so that's something just to be aware of. But again, be very aware of that. Being in a good place for when the market slows down is important. One thing I can tell you that I want to share a couple of anecdotes, just because I think there's a lot of very smart people that are on these webinars and are watching this. If you get hired at a firm where you're not going to be the biggest fish in the pond, that can often be dangerous. So one of the things I saw is I've seen this in one of the times when the market was arguably just as busy as it is now would be the coast markets, places like Palo Alto and New York and with corporate. And the busiest it ever was prior to now was probably in 2000. And so what happened is there was so much demand for people then that law firms were hiring people out of fourth tier law schools and that hadn't done that well there. And they were hiring people out of small firms. And the second the market turned, all those people were let go, almost regardless of how well they were doing. So you don't necessarily want to overshoot. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If you're nervous about staying there, you want to, and the firms that let them go were typically the ones that weren't the best managed, but they're large firms that are badly managed and there's small firms that are badly managed. So taking a position with a firm where you're not going to necessarily have a future, if you look at all the partners there and stuff, it's not necessarily the best thing, because the market is good enough that you actually have the opportunity now to get hired at those sorts of places. It's almost comical how good the market was before and how good it could possibly be getting right now with everything. So these are some of our interview and hiring statistics. And these are just different practice areas where you can see declines and so forth. I'll go into more detail about this later, but you can see some of these practice areas, which I'm sure probably don't involve you, like alcohol and beverage law and antitrust and competition, are typically niche practice areas. So in terms of what goes on there is not really probably that important, but it should show you that there's been a little bit of growth. And antitrust, there's been the banking and finance for some reason, there wasn't a big growth. bankruptcy for the past couple of years has not a ton of stuff has happened with those practice areas. And then you do see some other things like construction and corporate continually does well. Corporate always does well when the economy is doing well. Data privacy is a very small practice area. So at present, I don't put a lot of weight into what's happened there. And these are a lot of the smaller practice areas. And the smaller practice areas, these kind of niche practice areas, this year there wasn't really as much growth as than in previous years. You have seen some growth in environmental, which I think would probably have something to do with the administration, but I don't know. You've seen some growth in some other practice areas here. Family law I was a little surprised about because I just keep seeing so many people get family law interviews and it is a very good practice area. And we've had instances where people it's just crazy how receptive different markets are. And very small markets, like people moving to a market of 20,000 people in Wisconsin from Colorado and getting 7 interviews and stuff with every person in the city practically. So the family law market is very good, but it certainly wasn't our most active practice area. And then you see just some of these other practice areas, which aren't really where you don't see a ton of growth. Healthcare there was quite a bit of growth there. That practice area is always doing well. If I was an attorney and going back into the market, I might think about doing that just because it's such an active practice area. Immigration also did well. During the Trump administration, it was not doing well because obviously there were all sorts of limits on immigration. And now I think that practice area will do very well over the next several weeks, for a while at least, but COVID obviously doesn't help it. And you can see here in insurance defense for recruiting firms, by the way, most recruiting firms do not make a lot of any insurance defense firm placements. And you can see here that it's literally among our top 10 practice areas in terms of things. So there's a lot of opportunity for insurance defense firm for attorneys. And it's a good practice area. Now, it doesn't always pay the most, but it's definitely an active practice area. This IP category is a general intellectual property. And then you can see things like IP litigation is slowing down. IP litigation has been slowing down for years. And so it's to do with Supreme Court decisions regarding patent trolls. So that our Supreme Court decision and it's been slowing down for a long time. That is not the greatest practice area to be in at the moment. Patent prosecution is always doing well, especially in the hard sciences, which are like electrical engineering and so forth. You can see that's always a place where we typically do make a lot of placements. The reason for that is just because there's a lot of patent attorneys among all the attorneys out there. It's a niche practice area. And then we have these other places like things like international trade, which we don't make a lot of placements in, and it's not a very active practice area outside of DC. And then trademark and copyright, I'm surprised that it slowed down so much over the past year. But I would think that would be more active. But trademark and copyright typically does well when there's a lot of new businesses being started and they need those services. Labor and employment was consistently one of our top practice areas. And then litigation is always the place where we get the most interviews and the most activity. And the reason for that is most attorneys are litigators. I don't know what the percentage is exactly, but I believe it's way more than 50%. I knew it and I know it, but I don't know it off the top of my head this second. So most attorneys come out of school and most attorneys go into litigation. That's always our top practice area in terms of what happens. And then you have maritime, municipal law is always a good practice area. You can see there that it's one of the top practice areas. This year, it's number 12. That's another good practice area to be in. And then we have a practice area called Other. We are coming up with different practice areas that we're going to be launching at BCG in the next 30 days or so. And so things that aren't covered on here, we put under there. And then you have patent agents. We're an attorney placement firm, but a lot of times attorneys will not take the bar and will just be patent agents. And so we've always consistently worked with them, and that's an active practice area as well. Real estate is always in the top different in terms of practice areas. And then you have tax, which is, I'm surprised that it did so well. And then technology transactions. Telecommunications is not that active. That was a very active practice area in the 90s and early 2000s, but it's never been that active since then. And then trust and estates has stayed very active and again, most placement and recruiting firms do not make a lot of trust and estates placements, if at all, because it's typically a consumer facing business, a consumer facing practice area. but that is one of our busiest practice areas. It's very active. I'd like to give advice for people's career ambitions. If you ever want to start your own firm, that's a very good practice area to do it in. There's lots of guidance online for people that are trying to do it. And it's just a very good practice area in all respects. It's a good practice area, and people can do very well. Candidates that we work with at Trust and Estates get a lot of firms and opportunities from us, so many so that they often get scared away. Because they're like, why are they sending me so many jobs? Or why are they sending me so many firms? There's just a lot of demand for trust and estates attorneys. And then the same goes with workers' compensation. I mean, that you can see there that's another area where we make placements, which most recruiters don't. Another consumer-facing type of practice area where there's a lot of demand, and frankly, it's been untapped, I think, by our company. It's a very active practice area. And then here is a breakdown. I hope you guys can see that. These are our placements and interviews. You can see placements compared to the number of interviews. So what's interesting about these, by the way, is you can see that quite a few, and actually I think this may be verted, but I think they may have done it improperly, but you can see quite a few placements. I think the placements actually are supposed to be the other color, but anyway, you can see here that lots of activity in trust and estates and telecommunications, and also all these kind of different practice areas. And this just gives you a sense of what it looks like from our standpoint in terms of the number of placements and interviews and what happened. It's this year compared to the last year. Where was the growth? And the growth really it looks like in workers' compensation, trust and estates, municipal, and then government contracts. And then you can see down here as well. So these are more of that. And government is a very active practice area, which you can see in healthcare, immigration. And these charts, by the way, will all be online. Immigration, you can see just massive growth, which is pretty awesome. And then some of this other stuff. And then this also right here will covers the growth by region. Our most active area in terms of where the most growth was, it was in the Midwest. And this is a very good market. I've been very surprised at, how receptive and open and how much hiring is happening in markets like Ohio and Iowa and Michigan and then Chicago. They're all very good markets. And there's a lot of growth. There's been less growth in the South and the Southwest, but there's some growth in, the West and then also the East. And then you can see also that a lot more interviews in different areas and placement. In the Southwest, for example, there's definitely growth in the number of placements that we made, but pretty much every region except for the West was very positive in terms of the number of placements last year. So that's good news. And you should get a sense of kind of that. If I was an attorney looking for a job and I looked at this information, I would say that the most growth is probably happening right now in the interior of the country, which is the Midwest. And in the West, which I'm sure you've been reading about, a lot of people leaving California. I just was reading a bunch of articles about it today. And there's definitely some growth in the Southwest and other areas. You've heard of people moving to Texas and so forth. And so that's important to understand. But all this information just shows you where there's the most interest, and it doesn't break it down by practice areas. This is just a little bit about some different practice areas. I don't want to spend, too much time on it. Cyber data privacy and cybersecurity is a good practice area to get into. If you're not in it, you can get certifications in it and you can learn about it. And people that are in law firms doing that are able often to get a lot of business at a very young age. I've met a lot of attorneys that have $4, $5, $10+ million in business, and a lot of them are doing things to do with privacy and so forth. That is a very good practice area to be in if you're interested in that. M&A is an interesting practice area as well. That is always very busy when the economy's good. It's mergers and restructuring and so forth. And so that it is going to be growing. And if you're a corporate attorney, it's obviously a very good market to be in. There's a ton of demand. People get lots of interviews. I have some candidates that basically worked for, this is a very common story, but they may have worked for 2 years as an M&A attorney 5 years ago and then quit and have been traveling and want to come back to work and are getting tons of interviews. So there's a lot of opportunity right now for M&A attorneys. Bankruptcy is not doing all that well in terms of a practice area. There may be some activity. There was a lot of people believing that when law firms stopped having PPP loans, and not law firms, but law firms got them too, but when they ran out of those funds, they would file for bankruptcy. It's really not happening at the rate people thought. that would happen. Trust in the state is doing well. And again, employment as well is doing well. There's a lot of activities in employment, and you can see all the interviews and so forth we got. I'm not sure exactly what is driving all of that in terms of the market, but I think a lot of people, there's a lot of openness on the coast to a lot of lawsuits against employers and receptive courts and governments and so forth. So there's a lot of that going on. And then there's questions about what policies are when people are working remotely and so forth. There's been issues with that. So employment, I foresee being an active practice area for some time. That's another practice area where if you're thinking about what practice area to go into, is a very good practice area for long-term employment security, because most employment attorneys get clients that are companies and they advise them on an ongoing basis, and they have a lot of them, and that can be very helpful to them. So that it's easy to get business, but there's plenty of work. There's lots of employment firms, and you can do it as a plaintiff, a defendant, and so forth. And so people do very well in that. So here's the litigation outlook for 2022. You can see here just continually a very active practice area. I don't know, it's 1/3 of our placements, 40% of our interviews. So it continues to be an active practice area and is doing very well. And I see a lot of ongoing activity there. I think everyone understands the kind of remote courts and so forth, which is making things a little bit difficult for people. But this is just some information about stuff like this. So virtual litigation, which I actually, enjoy to the extent I have to go to court for various things. It's all been virtual, which makes it much easier because you don't have to commute and so forth. And it probably actually creates more work for attorneys. And there's a lot of cases are taking longer to try. So that's just some information. It's just some stuff about politics, which I don't think is really that important to cover right now. It's in the online report that you guys will be getting shortly. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity for attorneys if you're thinking about breaking out and working on the open, working on your own with your own practice. I think you can do very well. And there's definitely a lot of different litigation trends and so forth going on that you can learn about. Corporate, it continually does well. Though what tends to happen is the corporate is doing so well that there's actually, even though the interviews have gone up, people will get hired with a lot less interviewing because the firms just don't have people. There's major law firms out there that don't even get people applying for their corporate jobs. If you're a corporate attorney right now, you have a lot of opportunity. It's just something to be aware of. And it's just a very good market for corporate attorneys right now. And the thing is that there's enough money going around at companies, so they're doing well, that they're actually happy to hire external attorneys right now. The spend of what it was in 2016, for example, is 35% higher than it was in 2016. And there's just a lot of optimism about hiring and so forth. And most clients, 4 of 10 corporate clients anticipate an increase in legal spending, which is very good, and only 20% anticipate a decrease. So that means that if you're a corporate attorney, you have a lot of work coming down the pipeline. And then there's also regularly all these kind of different issues which corporate attorneys work on, which I don't want to spend too much time on. And same thing here in terms of the overall risk. This is not a lot of information which you guys can read about in the report, but there's just a lot of opportunity right now for corporate attorneys and corporate legal departments inside of law firms. Real estate is another practice area that has been doing well. Real estate always does well in low interest rate environments fairly consistently. And so you can see here that our number of placements, it's almost 7% of our placements, which is very high for that niche of a practice area, but it's been going up. The same thing with interviews. So real estate attorneys are very marketable, and I don't anticipate that will change in the near future. The real estate market, obviously, the residential real estate market has been doing well. The office market is another story, but there's a lot of investor funds out there and so forth. And so people have been spending a lot of money on real estate, and you can see, there's just a lot of capital out there and so forth chasing real estate, and that's creating work. And then there's also the Infrastructure Investment Act, which is creating a lot of work for commercial real estate attorneys in the future. And so all this stuff is driving a lot of real estate work. So if you're in the real estate market, you should continue to do very well. I don't see that slowing down, probably even in a recession because of all the government spending going on. I would see it continue to do fairly well. And then there are some issues in terms of the tax code So that may affect some things to some extent, but I'm not sure. Trust and estates, again, is a practice area that's been growing. You can see that how much our placement activity grew over the past year. It doubled in terms of the number, more than doubled, tripled, quadrupled actually in terms of the number of placements, and then it doubled in terms of interviews. As I said, that's just an awesome market, and it's a good practice area to get into. It's something that people can start their own practice with fairly easily. There's just a lot of opportunity there, and I don't anticipate it will continue going on as the population ages. There's just a lot of things going on in trust and estate, so it's a very good market. Labor and employment, again, you can see that our number of placements did decrease, but the interviews stayed fairly steady. I don't see anything decreasing too much. In labor and employment, by the way, there's two kind of aspects of it. There's what's called counseling, and then there's litigation. So counseling means when employers have questions about policies and so forth. At our company, for example, we use outside counsel to advise us on things, even though we have inside counsel, but we were constantly emailing and talking with our outside counsel about various issues. And it's the same thing in companies, like in all companies, they do that. There's opportunities for counseling, then there's opportunities for litigation. A lot of attorneys do counseling, also do litigation. And then there's the plaintiff and defense aspects of labor and employment as well. There's also a big market in filing plaintiff's lawsuits. So there's just a lot of activity in labor and employment, and it's another good market to get into. The thing that's cool about labor and employment is if you're a litigator, it's fairly easy to transition into it. Or if you're a labor and employment attorney, it's fairly easy to transition to litigation. Litigators can often do both, and it's very common for one person to transfer, for people to move between different practice areas. The other thing I like too, by the way, about labor and employment is it's very easy not only to get business, but to go in-house. So that's something to consider if you're thinking about practice areas. There's a lot of demand for goods and services, a lot of money going around in the market. There's a lot of hiring at all levels of retail and manufacturing. There's a lot of people quitting their jobs. A lot of businesses have a lot of work. I saw a banner ad yesterday where Amazon was offering a $3,000 starting bonus to people to work on boxes in their warehouses. And there's just a lot of opportunity out there and a lot of openings for people, which again will create more and more work for attorneys, which is all very good. And then again, there was a little bit of drop in services at the beginning of COVID, but because of less demand for vacations, concerts, and so forth. But in terms of travel, I think that's probably picked up right back to pre-level, at least domestically. And a lot of people are returning to work. And again, they're saying that global business travel is going to increase 30%, 7% this year, over 1 trillion. And just all these different sectors are very active. More jobs because of spending bills. I don't want to get too far into that, but there's, as I mentioned with the real estate, that's going to have an effect on the jobs and also the economy by putting more money in the economy. And people that were displaced by the pandemic, I see coming back to work, which will also create a lot of legal work, unemployment work rate. I see steadily continuing to decrease and doing. These are just some, other things here where you can see interviews by region, again, in different practice areas, which I believe that with our sample size of candidates, which is probably 40,000 attorneys we may have worked with over the past year, gives you a pretty good understanding of what's going on in different practice areas and locations. So you can see telecommunications, it was pretty much all in the East. And then you can see immigration was in the East, and then to a lesser extent in these other areas. So it's very interesting to get a sense of where's the activity for different practice areas. All this will be put online, by the way, so you can see it there too. And then the same thing goes with placements. So you can see for whatever reason, the Midwest was very active for real estate, and litigation was the most active, it looks like, in the Southwest. And so all these different kind of areas where there was growth and so forth is interesting. And it can give you a sense of the different areas of the country and what are active. And where you do your search and where you work does typically have a big impact on your career. There's a lot of studies that show if you start your career in a recession, your lifetime earning capacity is much, much lower than if you start in a good economy. There's a lot of studies that talk about where you start your career will have a lot of impact on what ends up happening to you in the long run in terms of the legal market you're in, or the size firm you start with, and so forth. So all this stuff can impact you. And you should, when you review this stuff, when it goes online, you should think about these numbers and what it means, because putting yourself in a pool where there's a lot of activity as opposed to where there's not can it is not necessarily something to be aware of. Here you can see antitrust and competition is pretty much confined to most of our positions to the East and West Coast, which would be obviously if you want to do that, you have to kind of decide where you want to work, and you can get a sense too of different things happening in these practice areas. And all this will be online too, by the way, in a few days. But you can get a sense of kind of what's happening in these different practice areas by different locations. You can get a sense of where was the bankruptcy activity, where was the activity in construction, law, and so forth. Construction typically is always on the coast and in the Southwest. Construction law, by the way, is also a very good practice area. I don't think that we promote those jobs very much, but it's an extremely active practice area. Corporate, you can see, is almost always fairly active on the coast, but it's been active in different areas in terms of placement and interviews. And see here with energy and oil and gas, it doesn't look like we had much to do in different areas there. Entertainment is always pretty much, a lot of people are interested in entertainment law, almost all the activity is on the East Coast and on the West Coast. So if that's something you're interested in doing, you're much more likely to have the luck there. There's so many people that try to do entertainment law that it's a very hard market, by the way, for recruiters to really do a lot of value add, unless it's a very specific type of opening, like it could be trademark work for entertainment companies or a special type of, because typically the problem with entertainment is people are so desperate and want to do this so much. And I don't know, it's one of these practice areas where people are really excited about it. And so most entertainment attorneys and law firms receive tons of unsolicited resumes all the time. And most of those openings are just filled by people hiring friends and that sort of thing. It's not a very active practice area. Entertainment, and then you have environmental land use. That's been a much more active practice area than it's been in the past. I'm actually very surprised because it's really did shut down for several years. ERISA is always fairly active in executive compensation. And then you can see some of these other practice areas here. Immigration obviously is very active, healthcare, and then insurance defense, which I talked to you about earlier. We were made placements in pretty much most markets where we work with people, which is good. And then you can see patent, same thing, very active. And then trademark, fairly active in most markets. And then litigation, very good in almost every market. So patent agents, tax, by the way, there's a lot of tax attorneys out there. And I just bring it up. People go get tax LLMs and they go into different forms of tax law. It's a difficult practice area for working at law firms just because a lot of people, first of all, it's often a support role. So it supports the corporate department, which means that right now, for example, you would think it would be a very good market, but it's the work. It tends to be supportive. It's not like a lead thing. Most of the time, tax attorneys, in order to be marketable, really need to be coming from law firms. And then there's other issues with that as well. There's a lot of them that come out of very well respected LLM programs. And I love tax. I would have loved to have been a tax attorney, I think. But unfortunately, it's a difficult market to make placements in and to get positions in if you're an attorney many times. But it's a good practice area. If I was a tax attorney, by the way, the people that do a lot of taxation stuff and are marketable most of the time tend to be involved in ERISA or trust and estates, which both involve tax. That's what I would spend most of my time doing, just knowing what I know. The other thing I would just say about tax is there's a lot of opportunities in accounting firms for tax people, but not as for tax attorneys, but not as much in large law firms. And then these are just some of the things you can see with trust and estates and these other practice areas. And then they're broken down here by states. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think all this information is online and it can be very interesting for people to look at and see where the activity is. And again, I do think we have a very large sample size. When you see us getting interviews in different areas, it means that there's probably a lot of activity. If you see us not getting interviews, it may mean that we don't have a lot of people we're working with there, but these are just different types of attorneys in different markets. And you can see all these statistics, and it's fun to go over these. I like studying them and seeing what's happening, different rankings of different law firms and so forth. And again, the legal market, just a couple of things to consider, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the market has really been moving and there's been a lot of changes that have happened. What happens, and anytime the market's changing, is most people get very happy with the way a business model's working. A law firm partners. Typically, if they've come out and they've spent 20 years learning how to practice law one way, or 30 years, are not going to be comfortable with change. Most law firm leaders are not going to say that they're happy, that they want to offer clients greater value other than reducing rates. So the most 70% of companies will say that there's a lot of resistance to change. And this is just from an Alden Weil survey. And so what that means is if you're a young attorney, there's a lot of opportunity out there to do things differently. I think in terms of how you deliver legal services, I think that hopefully someone listening to this will be a leader and will go out and figure out how do we offer clients greater value. And there's a lot of inefficiency in the legal market. And there's a lot of things that could be done much better. And in terms of how things happen, I think there's a lot of opportunity. And one of the things now is remote work. So obviously with remote work, all the cost of attorneys in the past and the high billable hours, a lot of that was to support a very active office with lots of staff and very expensive offices and people coming in there and cafeterias and all this sort of thing. And now the people are so excited about working from home. Arguably, they could work in different states and so forth and provide the same type of service. And I think that remote work offers a very good opportunity for some sort of entrepreneur to come in and really wrap and get and reduce legal costs for employers. So that's something that people are very interested in. And so it alleviates the need for a lot of these high legal fees to some extent. And I think that one thing that someone said to me, a very well-known attorney at the beginning of this whole COVID thing, was that it was going to accelerate remote work. I didn't really think about it very much, but at the time he was right. And so I do think there's going to be different deliverable models and law firm rates. Entrepreneurs will step in and do a lot of the work that different clients are paying a lot of money for right now in a different way. In law firms, by the way, it's very difficult for new attorneys because the training can be more difficult when you're remote. I think a lot of the learning that happens in law firms is in face-to-face meetings and lunches and things that aren't necessarily always happening. And I think that presents another opportunity for different types of training and about the kind of stuff that I talk about in terms of how to succeed inside of law firms. I think that's one thing. And then I think in the future, just a few things you need to understand that the market's going to change. And see here, and fell part of the pandemic, and attorney growth grew between then, the states. And so just a couple more things. 2022, a lot more people are going to law school now. It slowed down, of course, after the recession for several years, and lawyers are needed, and there's a lot of demand for attorneys at the moment. And as people retire and so forth, there's going to be more demand. And the market, as I said, is doing very well. So let me just go through this. And I think if you're a new attorney, I think it's a very good time to be an attorney. And I also think that if you're thinking about starting your own business, that's a very good opportunity right now. And these are just a few things added to the report, which I don't know are going to be that important for you to read about. World markets, let me just see here. Legal process outsourcing, which is another good opportunity for entrepreneurs. Legal billable hours, that's just an ongoing issue. Talked about business mergers and acquisitions, new paths for big law firms. I don't know that important. Let me just sit here. Paralegal jobs, which I don't think most people are that can be that concerned about. And then part-time work is another one. Is that becoming more acceptable? To some extent it is in law firms. That's an opportunity to think about as well. Predictions of legal technology. So that's about it. So I am going to I'll wrap this up with a few conclusions here, and then I'll take a break just for a minute or two. And then when I come back, we'll answer questions. But the big thing I just wanted everyone to understand in this report, and then again, everything will be online, is that the market is very good for attorneys right now. And because it's so good, you have a lot of opportunity. And that opportunity is basically to go to a better employer, regardless of where you're at, or to do well and get business wherever you are right now. And if it was me, if I was still practicing law and unhappy where I was, I would probably do one of two things. I would either go to a smaller firm, probably because I would have more opportunity there, or if I wanted to go to a larger firm, I think that would definitely be very easy, but I would be careful. The other thing I would do if I was an attorney, and this is just because I have an entrepreneurial mind, is I would look at some of these practice areas where there's a lot of demand And I would think about maybe specializing in them if I didn't like my practice area. If I was doing tax, I might think about trust and estates. If I was doing different things, I might, I don't know, if I was doing, litigation, I might think about doing employment, because you have to look at like, where's the demand in the market? And you also have to look at the markets you're working in. If you're in a market where there's not a lot of demand or the demand is decreasing, it may make sense many times to go to a market where there is a lot of demand. I also advise everyone that I work with at BCG to look at as many markets as possible. So a lot of times people will be interested in, they say they want to work in New York City. Well, that's great. You can work in New York City or you can work in Texas or wherever. But I've placed people in Texas that are still in New York City and stay in New York City and practice remotely in Texas. I've placed people in New York City that are in the South, in Savannah, Georgia. So the nice thing is when you look at different markets, you really have an opportunity to do that right now. And then finally, and that's huge. There's never been an opportunity like there is right now to move up in terms of the quality of firm you work with, and then also to work in different markets like there is. It's never been like this. And in many states you can waive into, or you can take a bar. I mean, you have some states like New York and California that have difficult bar exams, in Florida. But for the most part, it's not that difficult for people to get into other states and to practice law there. You can look, there's a BCG guide to reciprocity online you can look at. But that's one thing I would do. And then the other thing I would just recommend, really see where you're marketable, is to just look online, look at Law Crossing, look at positioning on BCG, set yourself up for job alerts on various sites, and just see where the opportunities are, because there are a lot of opportunities. And then finally, I do think because of all this remote work, I do think that there's a lot of opportunities out there. And I think legal services will be delivered probably in a much different way in the future. I would think that someone will come in probably and do that, and maybe you, but that's one thing that's going to happen. And when that happens, that will also create a lot of opportunity. But this is a great time to be an attorney. It's a great time to be a law firm because there's a lot of work out there. And so I think that it's a very positive report this year. It's one of the most positive I've ever, frankly, made, because I don't really see anything slowing people down at the moment. But the big thing is that when the market does slow down, which it always does, but you definitely need to be prepared for that. And it's going to slow down, and there will be something that happens in the future that slows it down. I don't know what that is. I can't predict it, but everything goes in cycles. And you have to think, one of the things is when you talk about people that get rich investing, which would be people like Warren Buffett and so forth, that they all make money when the economy crashes. So they buy things at the very bottom, and then because they know it's going to go up. So right now, I know that things will go down. And when they do go down, the best thing you can possibly do is be in a place that's safe, where it's well managed, where you're in a practice area that's going to be resistant to recessions, and where you realize, and where you can have a good career, because the sun never shines forever. People get old, law firms go out of business, companies go out of business. So just finding an environment, regardless of what practice area you're in or level, where you're likely to have a lot of long-term success if your choice is to remain in a law firm. And that's easier said than done, but a well-managed place where you can do well and also you can excel. And then the final is the example that I gave you earlier. During recessions, you can get into much better law firms than you could during good economies. You can get into much better law firms than you otherwise could during a slower market. And when the market slows down, which it always does, law firms will always let people go. Almost all of them do. There's very few law firms I know that don't lay people off when the market slows down. And when it does slow down, the people that they let go, unfortunately, are often the people that wouldn't get a job there in an average economy or a slow economy. It's not always in your best interest to move to a firm that's like incredibly awesome compared to where you're at, if you're not among the highest, the most qualified people there, unless you feel like you can really add a lot of value and work really hard and you understand everything. So those are just things to be careful of. And that's for early stage people early in your career. And that's just the pattern that I've seen. And it's just a kind of a warning to be careful. And then the other thing is, and I guess I'm saving this for the last, and this is very important. When the market is active, people get very entitled. And when the market's doing well, they get entitled because they know that their law firms need them. They get entitled because they know they can make more money elsewhere. They get entitled because they know they can get more interesting work elsewhere. They get entitled because other firms are giving out their benefits. They get entitled for all sorts of reasons. And that's not always a smart thing, because what happens is if you take that entitlement, the law firm will tolerate it if the economy is very good and they absolutely need you. But in the long run, they're going to be looking to bring in people that are not entitled. That's the whole cycle that happens at every law firm. People come in and they're entitled and they think that they're entitled to this and that. And the law firm will always push them out and figure out a way to do it. And it just happens in every law firm. That's the way it works. And partners won't like it. And if you're an entitled partner, the firm won't like it. If you're an entitled associate, they won't like it. If you're an entitled summer associate, they won't like it. And so entitled people the firms will always get back at you. And you need to be very careful about that. Not being entitled and working hard and being a team player and so forth, it's easier said than done. But those are the people that get ahead. And I told a story. We have a weekly recruiter meeting, and with all our recruiters and staff, and that we had one yesterday. And I was telling a story about, I was talking to a high level partner at a major US law firm. And that partner told me that there's, and I don't want to criticize anybody out there, but there's publications out there that specialize in putting out negative news about different law firms and things or different people. And so this guy was telling me, he said that they monitor the search history or the internet usage, whatever, of all their attorneys. And this was about a year ago. He said this to me, or maybe a year and a half ago. And they saw that anybody that made partner in their firm or was up doing well, was associate, or anyone that was a partner and had business, wasn't looking at all this negative news. And the negative news basically is a website that, maybe talks about salaries and talks about bad things happening. It makes fun of different, firms and stuff. And the idea is that when you're doing very well in your legal career, like you put your head down and you work hard, you don't participate in entitlement and negativity. And it's kind of been like that. It's been my whole career. I can think of when I started, people that were very negative and nothing ever happened to them in the legal profession, and people that weren't. And the people that weren't were always people that have gone the farthest. Doing well as an attorney is about your attitude. It's about not having a sense of entitlement. And it's about also in this type of market, not letting the stuff go to your head. Because if you let the fact that you're in demand go to your head and you act in that way, and it's especially prevalent among young attorneys, you will be expelled from law firms almost like a virus. And it's not a good thing. And when that happens to people, most of them don't know what's happened. They assume that the world's unfair and they blame others and so forth. But as a rule, you have to understand that being positive, not negative, not being entitled and so forth is very important. And I bring this up because I've seen people catapult their careers when they're in their 50s by doing that. But I've seen a lot of young attorneys catapult their careers, or actually it would be not catapult, more like flushing them down the drain when they're in their 20s by doing this and their 30s. And so just when it's a good market, you have to be careful. You have to be thankful for that. And you have to be, because people like people that are thankful and they dislike people that have entitlement issues. And when you're a young attorney, the other thing is that you have decades to practice. I mean, people practice now into their 80s and their 90s. And you're, as a young attorney in your 20s and even your early 30s, you're being trained in how to be an attorney and how to learn about politics and stuff. So just keep your head down, and you can certainly go to better firms, but I recommend whatever you do, not acting entitled, because I can, all of the episodes and the instances of people that I've seen, and I've seen thousands of them, do well. And the people that have done poorly, the ones that don't have entitlement issues, that are nice and work hard and don't create problems and so forth, are the ones that do well. And the ones that don't are the ones that are the ones that do the opposite, are the ones that have problems. And I know I shouldn't be emphasizing that so much in the State of the Market report, but the reason I'm doing that is just because I know that what I've said today about how good the market is going to get people very excited, because regardless of who you are, you can pretty much, unless you've just gotten out of jail or something, you have opportunity, and more opportunity probably than you've ever had. And you can do very well in this market, at least if you work with someone who knows what they're doing, or you know how to do a job search, which you can learn all about on our website. And so just don't let that the state of the economy and the market go to your head, because that can really do you a lot of long-term harm. And your goal really is to stick with this at least for the first 5 or 6 years, and then until something better comes along, and learn what you're doing. And then as you get older, your goal obviously is to advance too. Just remember that people like people and advanced people that are grateful and like their jobs, and people that have entitlement issues, they always will push out and in favor of other people. And that's one of the biggest lessons you can ever learn about how law firms work. It's something I've always seen. I will take a quick break now, just for a minute or two. I really apologize for the power failure here when we got started. I probably should have a generator, and I will take a quick break, and then I'll come back and I'll answer whatever questions you have about the market, and then also any questions about anything else. I've got all day for this, so as much time as you have, answer all your questions. Thank you. First of all, can you explain what your company does? Can companies sign up for you? How? Yeah, we're a placement firm. That basically means that what we do is we work with attorneys to find positions, and we have a website. It's bcgsearch.com. And typically I've been doing this for a quarter century, or almost a quarter century. Typically what we'll do is we take your resume, and once we have your resume and practice area and so forth, we can look at all the places that have ever interviewed someone with your background, have ever asked for someone with your background, and we can match you up with existing jobs. And then also, and then firms that would be interested in you, and then work with that information, work on marketing you to different firms. And some people like working with recruiting firms. Other people don't. It's the majority of people do, because we do all the work, but not everyone does. We have another site called Law Crossing, which we take pretty much any job that we can find in the world, legal job, and put it on that website. And research, it's different than something like Indeed or, LinkedIn, because we're showing you pretty much firms that, are not necessarily paying. So we're just it's just pure research. And then we have research of old openings and in-house and all sorts of things you can look at. So that's another thing. And then, but I'm not here to plug these websites. I'm happy to, I do for a living, but that's what BCG does. And we have, between these two companies, and we have 200 plus employees, and most of the work that we do is related to research and then finding positions and so forth. And then BCG is a marketing type company. So we will put together materials for you in terms of to help you when we're looking for a job for you. Law Crossing charges a fee to look at the research. BCG doesn't charge candidates fees. They're paid by law firms. Okay, for patent prosecution positions, how could I find out where the position really values strong technical background through interviews and other due diligence? Most of the firms will say they always do whenever asked, but they also appear to say they recruit for the best law school grades. Okay, so there's an article on BCG called Why Most Law Firms Have No Idea How to Hire Patent Attorneys, or something along those lines. So patent attorneys are a little bit different. Most patent attorneys will, and I don't want to get too much into it, but most of them don't do that well in law school, because they're working as engineers, making as much as lawyers in many cases while they're going to law school, or they have technical backgrounds and aren't necessarily as interested in case method and all that kind of stuff. Some of them do very well. And I think one of the top students in my law school class was an engineer that became a patent attorney, but most of them don't. So the law school grades, typically the path of a patent attorney, a lot of them go to school at night, but if they do go to law school, most do not get the greatest grades, And this is these are just some fun stuff to know about, but most do not get the best grades. Most do not get into the best law firms because they're scientists and they're technical. That's not personalities. They don't get into the best law firms when they graduate into the best law firms immediately. And then typically what happens, because they don't have the best grades and may go to local law schools because they're practicing law schools, because working when they go to school as engineers, when they go to school, and then engineers or scientists during school. And then what happens is they start out at small firms, and then they typically will move after, when they get 1 to 2 years of experience, will move to major experience, will move to large firms. So that's a pattern that typically happens with patent attorneys. So they may ask for good grades and so forth if you're very young, like a new attorney, and you may be in your 40s when you go to law school, but I just mean like a junior. And that's typically what happens with patent prosecution attorneys. They will often start out in smaller firms, and then after that, will move into larger firms. And they all value technical backgrounds, but most of the positions in patent law firms are actually moving to smaller firms. There's not really, I don't really have a ton to say about that, the reasons why, but the main reason is that larger law firms will typically have higher billing rates, and that's kind of how it happens. Okay, let's see here. Answer live. 1 second here. So this person says, for some reason, I have to go between screens and my mouse is too fast. I probably need to adjust my mouse. Thanks. Okay, so this person says they got a verbal offer last week, but yet to receive an offer letter, they changed their mind. I would say maybe. Sometimes what happens when you get a verbal offer is a partner that really needs you will give you an offer or want to say they think they're going to make you an offer, and then they may not send you an offer letter. That's one thing that happens because a partner needs to get approval from other partners in the firm and so forth. They go to a committee before they do it. Law firms are also often very nervous about putting things in writing. So there are a lot of law firms out there that will not give you an offer letter, if you can believe it. And it doesn't sound like you're in that situation. Otherwise, you would have said that. But some of the largest, most prestigious law firms do not give offer letters. They'll just basically say, this is what your salary is going to be because they're afraid you'll use it against you. But just remember, in a law firm, everything needs to be reviewed and proofed. And so all these people are going to have to look at it. Maybe someone's going to have to approve it. And so that's kind of what you need to worry about. Also, last week was a holiday week. And then people are coming back to the office. So I wouldn't worry too much about that delay. And I wouldn't think that they're changing their mind just because of that. 1 second. It's very difficult to get between this. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to adjust my mouse settings. Okay, sorry about that. 1 second. I can go to the next question. Sorry. May need to get some help here because I'm having a hard time getting to these questions. I can see the questions, I just can't. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the question says, I'm a recent lateral to Kirkland, or assuming it's Kirkland Nautilus. Sorry, I'm ridiculous. I can't. Here we go. I'm a recent lateral to Kirkland LS and was recently notified of a committee review coming up. It looks like a form email and says that I'll be getting a review because I'm a recent lateral, but I wasn't aware the process existed. Is this normal? Should I worry about getting frozen out? I'm still getting work, and the partners have generally been happy with me. Yeah, reviews are scary, and I think that they're very scary because it really depends on your class level. The purpose of a review really is to get you to improve if there's issues, or to make you feel secure if there's not, if there are issues, or to get you to improve, or to get you to feel secure if everything is okay. There's a couple of things I just wanted to say about reviews. So people are getting reviews right now. Now, Kirkland, most large law firms, especially if you're a recent lateral, a lot of them are really need people at the moment because it's more employers. It's better for job seekers than it is employers. And so if you're at that good of a firm, I would think that they're going to be more interested in giving you a good review than a bad one. But that's not always the case. If you think you're doing a good job, you're probably not doing things that are completely in line with their culture or their work style just because you're from another firm. It's not, I mean, you may be doing everything right, but that's a very good firm and they're very well managed. And so I would say that they will probably give you a good review and everything should be fine. And I don't know what level you're at, but I would assume that everything would be okay. But there's a couple points that I just wanted to make everyone aware with reviews, especially if you're a young attorney or you're an older attorney. So typically there's 2 stages of a review and they do it in a couple of different ways. And so you have junior attorneys, and then you have mid-level, and then you have senior, and then you have counsel, partner, that's right. Counsel, and then you have partner. And I'll just go through how those reviews work. So, most well-run firms will do reviews. It's basically, it improves the work product. And frankly, partners don't like doing reviews. No one likes doing reviews. Most people don't like getting reviews. It's just not fun. Junior attorneys are typically given a lot of feedback. Typically, a lot of feedback is given. And what happens, reviews are typically based on the economy, but during the good economy, they're less harsh, and during a bad economy, very harsh. If they want you to leave. And they often want everybody to leave during a bad economy. Depending on the firm, they obviously don't want people to leave if they need the work. They don't want to have to hire them. And they know that if they give you a bad review, you're going to leave. But the other problem is when you're, 1 to 3 years out, or 1 to 2 years out, you have no idea what you're doing. And you're likely to make mistakes, what you were doing. And regardless, likely to make lots of mistakes. And because they also have to write off a lot of your time, and they're training you. And so depending on how they review you, if they give you a bad review, they know you may leave, but at the same time, they need to make you a good attorney. And some law firms are based on the idea that they're free spirits and everyone is expected to rise to the level. And then others are very regimented and believe that people need to be forced to work a certain way. But when you're a junior attorney and you're not profitable and you don't know what you're doing, you can expect a lot of feedback and you can expect lots of nitpicking and stuff depending on the firm you're with. And it can feel horrible if you're a young attorney. And my first firm was, Quinn Emanuel. I never got reviewed there. And then I went to work at a firm called, at the time, Dewey Ballantine. And it was actually very funny. The only review I ever had, and it wasn't even, I'll tell you what it was, the review started. And these guys were from our New York office, and I was working in Los Angeles, and they brought out people from New York to do the reviews. And they walked into my office and they started giving me this just horrible review. It was like, no one likes you and you're doing horrible work and it would make sense for you to start looking for something. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And then they're like, and we're not even going to talk about what happened. And they brought up this crotchety old partner and I said, what? I've never worked with him. And they said, and they looked at each other and then they looked and they said, you're in your 8th year. And I said, no, you've got the wrong guy. I'm a 3rd year or 2nd year. And they said, oh, we're sorry, we have the wrong person. And because I didn't know, they just walked into my office and they thought I was someone else, which is very funny. I knew who they were talking about after a little bit because there was only another 8th year there. But the point is that I actually never got reviewed, but I talked a lot about reviews in this, and they're scary. I was very scared when that happened. I almost, fainted. But typically when you're a junior, you're going to get a lot of feedback and you're going to get bad reviews. You're not going to be happy with them unless you're in with your reviews, and not always. Now, in a good economy like it is right now, you're probably not going to get very bad reviews. And if you do, I would be concerned, but you're going to get a lot of feedback. And it's very difficult because you're almost like a racehorse being broken in and so forth. Mid-levels are typically good if the firm has, because you're profitable now. If the firm, you're profitable. And when you're profitable, the law firm is more than happy to give you good reviews, and they will say very nice things to you. They'll say you're on the right track, meaning you're going to be a partner and all that sort of stuff. And they'll say positive things and they'll be very nice to you. Then when you get senior, which could be, depending on the firm, could be 7 to 10 years, they'll start saying things like, either if they don't have work, they'll start reminding you of, they'll nitpick and do the same thing they did when you were a junior associate, and they'll do that and not be as nice to you and say horrible and say things to surprise you. But if they do have work, they may say things like, we're going to see what happens. It will start being less, we'll see what happens, and things along those lines. They'll be less definite with you, and if they don't have work. And then if you're a counsel or partner, most counsel and partners know what they need to do. So counsel and partners, you have income versus non-income. So, typically the discussions are around business, your originations, and that sort of thing. Or they won't even be reviews at all. You'll have a meeting where you go over what you're going to make and what your percentages are and so forth for an income partner. So that's how that they work. But it is important to realize that if you're at a large law firm that has a lot of confidence, they're going to give bad reviews to junior associates. It's a matter of course, but you're expected to take everything that they say and really learn from it. Most mid-level attorneys, if the market's good, are going to get good reviews because they're making a lot of money from you as a mid-level. And then senior people will often do fine if there's a lot of work, but it gets harder to get work when you're senior because you're suddenly competitive with partners, so the reviews will get bad again. And that's the pattern that happens at law firms with reviews. And I hope that's helpful. Oh, here's a good question. I love these questions, by the way. These are so much fun. Let me see. Okay. And I hope that question, and someone has a follow-up question about reviews, but just don't take them too seriously if you're a junior associate is a big thing. And laterals, they do want to get you. Okay, I hate the idea of returning to the office. During the pandemic, we've proven that work from home works. Productivity is an all-time high. I've been able to live in a beautiful place, which has been significantly better for my mental health in the city. That's good. Being driven back to the office feels like nothing more than a control micromanagement issue with the old partners who lived in their tiny windowless office for years to make it. I think we should have to do the same. I agree. From speaking to others, it seems like that is a general consensus among associates in my group, and the vast majority of folks would prefer to stay remote. I'm generally wondering why a significant portion of us don't return to the office. With the market is the way they are, our big firms going to fire people, what's stopping people? Okay, so a couple things about working from home versus working in an office and so forth. So there's an old saying in large law firms that, and this is something important to think about in terms of your career. There's an old saying in a large law firm, in most law firms, that it's impossible to make partner in a branch office. And that's certainly not something you probably want to hear if you're working in a branch office and on this call. But it's much harder. It's much harder because the decisions are made by people in the main office, mainly. And so making partner with them making partner in a lot of these big firms requires that you work in the main office. Now, if you're talking about not going in the office at all, then in any office, like branch office, then that's really going to hurt your future. One of the things I would also say is that a lot of the learning that happens inside of law firms is in face-to-face interactions. It's about things that people won't say in Zoom conferences or on the phone or in emails and that sort of thing. So a lot of learning is informal. You will learn most of the stuff in informal settings. It'll be remarks, things that are said, things that aren't said, people stopping by your office and all that sort of thing. So that's one thing to think about. How are you going to get ahead if you don't have face-to-face contact with these older people that are coming to the office? And I agree. It's no fun being in a tiny windowless office. And certainly partners, that's no fun. Your success as an attorney is really related to your ability to get work. And it's much easier to get work when you can stop by someone's office or you have an informal relationship with them or they see you in the office than if you're not there. So that's one thing to think of. Now, in our company, for example, we have different types of employees. We have recruiters, we have researchers, we have, writers, we have accounting, we have, what else? Legal. And we have certain people, if they work remotely, it's actually a problem. And so the law firm needs, because a lot of times they won't be working. Like I had an attorney that was working for me in-house not too long ago, and I was on a hearing, and in the middle of it, her phone turned on and with her screen for some reason by accident, and she was in a mall during a shopping during the middle of the hearing. Now, I'm not saying that's normal, but this kind of stuff happens. So law firms, you need to be, regardless of how you feel about your work environment, you need to realize that it takes certain things to get ahead in a law firm. And if that's not your goal, that's fine. But it does take certain things to get ahead. And really the most important thing you can worry about is access to work. If you have access to work, then you're fine. And then you have to worry about training and relationships. People that are going to advance at your firm are going to be the ones that have the right training and the right relationships and certain knowledge about different things. So those are some things to keep in mind. And then the only other thing I would think that's important is everybody wants comfort. And I'm no different than that. I love watching TV and, relaxing and exercising and comfort. Comfort is something that everyone is going after. But the problem is the more you chase comfort, the harder your life often is. And you can have comfort now, but you might not have as much comfort later. I personally do not like working in windowless offices either. Done it. Actually, no, I've never worked in a windowless office. Actually, yes, I have. But at the same time, you have to think about what is your career going to look like. If you're working in a big firm, the big firm can always find people to work there. With some exceptions, most large law firms get lots of applications for any job that they have. And a lot of people don't want to work there. So they at some point, and so they can easily take back the power. And after all, they are the employer. And so you may, if you refuse to work there, go back to work. I don't really know how much that helps you because that's going to hurt you. One other thing, attorney sues law firm or employer, former employer, with some exceptions, unless you're a partner with business, often unemployable. They will find that. And I'm not saying you would sue your employer, often unemployable. If you stick up to yourself that way, it may hurt you in the long run. Not going back to work, refusing, may hurt you. And then the final thing is, and I hate to talk so much about this because I think there's a lot of questions, but I think this is an important question, is you have to have the attitude of what does my employer want? And what are why in the office? Often they want company. I know it sounds ridiculous, but they want company. They want having you there. It makes them feel important. Makes partners feel important. It's what happened. It's what happened when they were, and that sort of thing. So you just need to think about it that way. And certainly there's plenty of people that may not want all that. And so those would be places that you could work, but you have to just understand that if you do come at it with that attitude, that there's going to be issues. And the other thing is, again, like I brought this up earlier, but so I'm trying to find my mouse here. It's really difficult. Can you get Michael to help me find my mouse? Thanks. Yeah, I'm just trying to find this good question there.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I put the questions up here. Oh, but that's going to be too big.
Well, those are fine. I can do it like that.
Yeah, you can move it around. Yeah, and if this ever doesn't work, the battery goes out, you always got the track.
All right, but I'm just wondering why. Oh, I can see. But where's the question? Right here?
Oh, okay.
I don't know why I can't move to the mouse.
Yeah, I think that one just has some issue.
The mouse? Okay. Oh, here we go. This next question. I'm at a tier 1 firm and have billed less than 2 hours this year. All signs say that the market is still busy. Am I being frozen out? Yeah, that's not good. So one of the things that you need to do, first of all, sometimes firms, I don't know what practice area you're in, but you may be incorporated and you may just completed a deal or something, but you have to be proactive in getting work. So regardless of where you're at, you have to be proactive in getting work. You need to go all out and do whatever you can to get work from people. And so a lot of people will get frozen out because a lot of people will not get work. Now there's some examples just that come to mind. I knew one corporate attorney that he was at a firm and he had to be in the office every day or every Monday at 9 a.m. to respond to an email when the work would go out. And he was like, I'm not going to act like that. I didn't go to law school to be, but you did go to law school to have to get work. Partners are expected to get work and associates are expected to get work from partners. That's just the market economy and all law firms. So the market economy demands that you get work. Sometimes what'll happen is that a partner won't like you that has given you work in the past. They won't like how you behave. They won't like something you said. They'll sense some entitlement. Maybe you didn't do a good job for them in the work, or maybe you worked too many hours, or maybe your work wasn't thorough enough. I don't know. But whatever, you did something wrong, and they will bring that up in the review. But you can also go ask what did wrong, and if they're not giving you work. And the other thing is, do other people have work too? So that's the other question I would ask. Do others have work? And ask that question. But if they do, then you need to go find work. And that means if you're in a tier 1 firm and there's a lot of people around, you should be able to find other people to get work from. A law firm if you're in a large office with hundreds of people, the odds are there's going to be other people that can give you work, even if one partner doesn't like you. Because remember, if there's 20 partners in an office, those 20 partners may not like each other. So one partner is not going to, 10 of the partners, typically 1/3 of the people will like you. People will like you out there. People will like you. 1/3 will not like you. 1/3 won't care. So that's typically the rule. There's been studies on that and stuff. It's funny, but 1/3 won't care. So your objective is to really try to find the 1/3 of people that do like you. So just because you go do an assignment or something and you work with someone that doesn't necessarily like you and they give you a bad review, or a couple of people that like you just need to find the people that do like you. And that's really the big thing to worry about. Okay. Question? That's working better. So this next question is, I'm a second year corporate associate who's been struggling to stay organized. I feel like I picked up a few things that helped over the past year, but sometimes I find myself getting overwhelmed, struggling to keep track of everything that's outstanding. Do you have anything that's been a game changer and helped you stay organized when things are crazy? Yes. Most good associates and attorneys in different firms will keep to-do lists. And typically you'll start your day There's typically a couple different things to do, but I'll just show you the list. There's a lot of focus planners out there, but one of the things that I'd like to do is at the beginning of the week, you can, and this is what I've been doing for years, you can list 20 things you need to do, or whatever, 20 to 50 things you want to do. And then you can rank them in one to five, where 5 due immediately, done this week or whatever. And then you list those things out at the beginning of the week and on one sheet of paper. And then on Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday, whatever days you work, you list maybe things need to do, things must do today, and then things would like to do today. And then you just cross things off of that list. And then as the week goes on, things will come up. But that's really the big thing is a simple thing like that. There's a thing that I recommend that's helpful, and you can look at it online, what it is. I think it's called Focus Planner or something. I have nothing to do with it, but that's one of the ways to organize things. Now, I actually do something much more significant than that because I try to have personal goals and work goals and different types of goals. So I recommend doing other types of planners that are much more comprehensive than that. But just from a professional standpoint, the Focus Planner, that's what it does. It basically just says, what I'm going to do at the beginning of this week. And then, so every week you write down the things you did. And then Monday through Saturday, you write down the things you did. And then you have things I must do today and things I would like to do today. And that's really it. And then the other thing that's important just from a planning standpoint, it makes your job much easier, is that you have every Sunday, like most people recommend you do it on Sundays. You write down what accomplished this week, and then you can do what I learned this week about whatever, and then you spend 15 to 30 minutes writing down what you need to accomplish. And if you do that, you're going to be much better off. I think better off. The planning that you do is extremely important. Very few people have long-term goals. So if you write down things like, I want to be a partner within 6 years, or I want to start my own, law firm or whatever. If you have those things as part of your goals, you should have goals that you're working towards. And if you do, you're going to be much more successful in the long run. Keep in mind that regardless of what your job is, where you're practicing law or what you do for a living, you are practicing or you are competing against people that have goals. And so if you're competing against people that have goals and you don't have goals, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose against them. And that's the problem. So it's something to be aware of. Okay, let's see here. So I hope that's helpful. But again, it's Focus Planner. Another guy I like for planning, but there's lots of planning gurus out there. Tony Robbins has a system called RPM. So there's also another one called Michael Hyatt. So those are a couple guys that are really good in terms of planning systems. Tony Robbins is RPM, and then Michael Hyatt, and then also Focus Planner. And then there's just a lot of other systems out there. I think there's one called Squirrel or something along those lines that it's also very good. But I think this simple system there, just write down 10 things or 20 things at the beginning of the week that you need to do. And then every day write down the things you need to do. And then you spend 30 minutes at the end of the week about writing down what you accomplished, what you learned. And then that's all very helpful. I actually do an exercise like that every day because I learn stuff every day and it's fun to write it down. A lot of times, most of what I learn is not business related. It's just about people and things. Okay, myself. My law firm at Providence as junior associates. We have no third years, which in turn would be teaching the first and second years. Our first and second years are good people that you're going to help out, but they are extremely well practiced by some substantively. The 2 or 3 competent juniors we have out of a sizable class are staffed to Gill and nearly impossible to get a hold of. I get the sense the firm doesn't want to lose me or have me ladder off somewhere else, as my reviews have always been very positive. While I genuinely like and respect everyone in my office, I'm very concerned about the lack of junior assistants. It means I'm never going to be able to fully develop the skills I need to one day get a shot at partner, even to be an effective. Is it different in the shop, or am I just burned out and griping about issues on mid-levels? So, yeah, it is different at other firms. So the mid-levels are the hardest for law firms to hold on to because they're the most profitable. And I think, so that may be an issue of the prestige of your firm or the pay. I would think that if you are even more than a mid-level, then you would fairly easily be able to move at this point. And you may be griping about stuff that, is unfair, that you believe is unfair. But I would think that in your situation, you're not in a great spot. And again, the competent juniors will probably leave at some point if they're getting all that work, and then you're going to have more problems there as well. Yeah. And the firm will give you positive reviews, especially if they need you, and overlook stuff that they wouldn't in a different economy. But I don't know that it means, I think that a lot of times, one of the things when you say you've never fully developed your skills, one of the things that happens a lot of times, there's litigators in AmLaw at 10 firms that may partner without ever going to doing a trial and that sort of thing, or even working on having clients. The skills you develop, even as a 7th or 8th year, and I don't know what you're at, are really relevant to, you don't really need to worry about if you're doing work that you think is beneath you and stuff at this point as much as, I guess, you don't need to worry about that. And I don't think that having to work on a lot of these matters yourself is something that's going to kill you in the long run. I think that most attorneys with 3 or 4 years of experience are capable of doing most things and learning on the job. So I do think you could probably be an effective GC, but I do think you could probably also move firms if you wanted to. And the fact that your firm has all this work is probably a good thing. And if they can't hold on to mid-levels, that may be because of the prestige level of the firm or the pay or something along those lines, or it just may be because of the markets, whatever market you're in, makes it hard. But if you're happy at your firm and you think things are going well, then there's no reason to leave. But I would say that you're probably in a position right now where you probably could leave if you wanted to. Okay, next question. Fix my mouse. I received an offer from an AmLaw 100 law firm to start as a 2nd year, but I have 6 years of experience in an accounting firm, in-house at a law firm. About 2 years of my experience was with a mid-sized law firm. Should I consider asking to be as a 3rd-year associate or just accept starting as a 2nd year? My experience so far is mostly in tax, but I will expand in more general M&A, tax, and supposedly some real estate. Okay, yeah, so it's important to ask yourself why the firm wants to start you as a 2nd year. The reason they want to is for their clients, most likely. They may say other reasons, but if they start you as a 2nd year, they can charge a lower billing rate for you, and they can give you more work that will give you more experience. So I think that's probably why they're doing that. The thing I would say that your pay is not going to be much different as a 2nd year than it would be as, say, a 3rd or 4th year. It may be some different, but if it was me, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I would take the position and work really hard for the next 5 years and see what comes of it. That's what I would do. I think that once you get that on your resume, no one's going to ask you, or if you're interviewing to be a general counsel someplace in 4 or 5 years, what level you're at. They'll think you're a 12th year, whatever, or 11th year at that point. So I really wouldn't worry about it. I think you're very blessed to be in the position you are, to be getting this offer and getting that experience, and you should be very happy. And the other thing too is that I think you may ask them if they could start you as a 3rd or 4th year associate, but if you don't plan on being there forever, it's not really going to make much of a difference anyway. If you work very hard there for 5 years, you'll probably be in the same place you would be. You might be a little richer in terms of the money you receive, but not much. So I would, if it was me, I would do that, especially if most of your experience is in tax. And now you're getting a chance to do corporate. Once you get corporate and M&A experience and real estate, and you'll be in a great position in tax. You'll be in a great position to go in-house, maybe a general counsel, or with the corporate M&A experience and to go into other firms or to bring in clients in the corporate market. So I think what you've done is very difficult, and very few people are able to transition to a law firm that's that awesome, top large and stuff at your stage in your career. You should be very proud of yourself and what you've accomplished. And I think that's great news. Okay, the next question is, any advice for lawyers over 55 with gaps in their resume? Yeah, I think lots of people have gaps in their resume. You can see here that the market right now is very good. And because the market is so good, this person was able to do something that would have been impossible a few years ago. They were able to go as a 2nd year, to a 6-year attorney to an AmLaw 100 law firm without ever having worked in one. So if you're a 55-year-old attorney with a gap in your resume, I think depending on your experience, you should be able to go back to a law firm. The way to think about it too is if you have things about yourself that are on this is advice goes for everyone. So everyone has issues in their background. Very few people do. Everyone has issues in their background. And all it means is an issue is this perfect background, perfect or close. It just means close means most prestigious firm. It's largest, biggest market. So if you have a really awesome background, incredible background, then most prestigious firm, I would just say firm. Let me just say here, firm market. Then you can get into the best firms and best markets if you have a perfect background. And then the farther you go down the ladder, very less prestigious, means smaller firm. Yeah, that's all. So anybody, it doesn't really matter what your background is. Anybody in a legal market can get something, and all it means is if you have gaps in your resume or other issues, or you have problems, you can't get into the most prestigious firms with those on your background, because the most prestigious firms are able to hire people with more perfect backgrounds. That's all. And the largest markets are often the most competitive, but New York and LA are perfect examples. And there's so many people that are competing for jobs there that most law firms get a lot of applicants, and so they can afford to be very selective. The things that law firms in New York will discriminate against for people, I say discriminate, I don't mean discriminate, disqualify people for, are crazy compared to what would happen in Chicago or other markets. It's just because they have more people to choose from, so they can be more demanding. This particular firm, I'm guessing, is probably not in New York City. The second year that's offering 6 year that's offering a 6 year person a job, and it may be, but it's law firms in New York City would never do this because they typically have so many people trying to work there. Now, that may be in New York City, I may be wrong, but it's probably in a smaller market. So that's just how things work. Less perfect, I would say less perfect. So so anybody that's over 55 or you don't like your law school, you don't like your experience, all that means you just have to work at a smaller law firm or smaller market until you perfect your resume and get stuff. So it's nothing really to worry about. Everybody's marketable. Everybody's great. Not everyone can be on plays on Broadway or be in the biggest movies when they come out. And it's just how it works, and work your way up to it. So there's nothing wrong with it. And Sylvester Stallone started out at softcore. I'm not going to get into it, but the point is that you start out somewhere, you go somewhere, and you get more over time. Let me just see here. What are your thoughts, advice for law students about creating your own writing sample? So they will ask for a writing sample. There's a couple things that I recommend. I recommend that everyone, by the way, always use grammar software. So there's like Grammarly, there's the Writing Aid. And so many people make mistakes with their writing samples and so forth when they're with typos and things. So you always want to proofread your work. It's extremely important. If you're a law student, typically you'll have a writing class your first year or something. I think there are most law schools where you write a brief or an appellate brief, or just use that. You typically, I think there was a lot of discussion, or I did a webinar about writing samples last week, but the big thing with writing samples is you want to make sure that you typically, if you did a law review article, that's great, but they'll always know that a law review article was gone over by a lot of people. So they want to see stuff that you've proofed. And typically when they're looking for a writing sample, they're just looking to see how careful you are. And that's how they're going to read it. They're not going to research the law, but they may look at blue booking and stuff. They're not going to get into a lot of detail about it. And you want to show that you can write. And so it should be something that's good and is direct. And if you studied like anthropology or something in college, you don't want to turn in that type of thing. You want to turn in a legal related writing sample. And that's the most important thing. If you worked in a law firm over the summer or something, then you don't want to turn in any type of information that might be confidential. Okay, this next question. Okay. And anybody, this is the last question. So if anyone doesn't have any other questions, this will be the last one I answer. But if you guys have other ones, I will answer them. I work at a mid-sized boutique and will be laddering out soon. I have heard from other associates who left the firm that the firm is somewhat known to try to skimp out of the last month's pay for associates who will be leaving. For example, whereas associates all have base pay salary raises starting in January, for associates who left in late January, the last paycheck didn't reflect the annual raise effectively. $3,000 short. Is there any recourse in a situation like that, or is the firm entitled to do that? Yeah, I think the firm can not pay you a raise if that's the case. If you leave, let me see. Yeah, if everybody got a raise and they're not giving you a raise, then you probably should say something to them. And when a firm does something like that to you, often just bringing it up with HR is an issue. And sometimes just having an attorney write a letter. I don't know if everyone has to get a raise or if that applies to people in good standing. I personally, if it was me, I wouldn't make an issue out of it. And the only reason is because these people in that law firm will typically be people that you may want for recommendations, or even they could be clients later. You don't know. If it's a few $1,000s, I wouldn't worry about it. You want to go out in the best way possible, but is it wrong not to pay you that? It might be. You might be able to get it just by calling up and asking someone in HR about it. or if it is illegal, writing a letter. And in a lot of states too, there may be laws against that. Okay, there's another question here. There's more questions. Good. So let's see. Give me 1 second here. Sorry, problem with my mouse. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the next question is, firms like Wachtell and Cravath accept laterals? So the answer to that is pretty much no. I've worked with people at Cravath before that have lateraled in there, but they've worked there before, and then they've come in as a reduced type of roles. I've never heard of Wachtell accepting laterals. Those are honestly, of all the firms in the United States, I don't, those are pretty much, it's a great question. The only two that I'm aware of that don't accept lateral, Sullivan and Cromwell does, David Polk does, a lot of very successful, very well-known firms do, but Wachtell and Cravath typically don't, which is interesting. What they're doing is they're trying to create their own culture and their own training systems and so forth for their attorneys. And so they don't like people mixing up the cart. But those are the only two firms really in the country that I'm aware of that don't regularly accept. I've never heard of someone lateral in there. I've heard of people, and they're very difficult. So typically what'll happen is that the very best firms are very protective of their culture and don't want people coming in there with different work styles and so forth. Okay, let's see. Okay. This question is, you discussed your firm works with law firms that place attorneys in large law firms. You also focus on in-house or small law firms. What is the best way to go working with BCG? Yes. So if you submit your resume online, it's just BCG search. I look at most of the resumes that come in, so I would look at it, or someone from our company would pretty quickly. And then we'd probably, if you're an experienced attorney and you're working in a practice area, we'll probably send you in a well-defined practice area. Someone would probably be interested in sending you our positions. I don't know why not. We don't make in-house placements. All we do are law firms, but we do lots of small law firms and tons of small law firms. And if you want to go in-house, I think a good source of in-house jobs is Law Crossing. What Law Crossing does, again, is it goes and researches every law firm in the country or every company in the country, and it puts the jobs on there. And it's much different than something like Indeed or other sites, because it's putting every job on there, not just jobs that the employers are paying to pay. So sites like Indeed are only showing you stuff that employers are paying to pay there. Law Crossing is showing you every single position it finds, and which can be very helpful for government and other things. The reason we don't make in-house placements at BCG is just because the law firm market is just massive. There's tens and tens of thousands of law firms, and there's plenty of opportunity in law firms, and it's very difficult to be an expert in anything but that. It would be almost impossible to do law firm placements and in-house placements and do them well, in my opinion. So if someone approaches us for law firms, we've been doing nothing but that for 25 years and have literally 150 people working at the company, the majority of them doing research and stuff for our candidates and finding information and putting together that sort of information. So it can be very helpful. Okay, I'm a 3L at a private law school in Oregon, and I'm looking to work in a large law firm in the Pacific Northwest. I should graduate cum laude, but not have the opportunity to summer associate at a large law firm, which is just perfectly fine. I have small firm experience as well as in-house experience. The advice on what I should be doing how to get into a larger firm post-graduation. Okay, so the big thing is no one has to start. This is an important point to understand about your legal career. No one has to start in a large law firm. Very few people do, compared to the number of people that ultimately work in large law firms. What tends to happen is people will get out of law school and they may not get the summer associate job when they're in law school, because they may be going to a local law school and they may only have a few people interviewing, a few large employers interviewing there, or you just may not do well interviewing. Who knows? I remember when I was in law school, I probably had a lot of interviews and certainly didn't get as many callbacks as I wanted to, and then offers from that. So people get interviews in different ways and mature in different levels. But what happens to most people is if you get out of law school and you specialize in something, whether it's whatever it is, and you put your head down and you work hard in that specialization, you can always move to a larger law firm later, especially if you graduate cum laude, and especially in a local area. So all you need to do, whether you're in Oregon or Illinois or Chicago or Cleveland or New York, all you need to do to get into a larger firm is to specialize in something and do very well in your firm and work hard. It's going to be impossible for some people to get into the very best firms because they may only have a few openings now and then, or they may not hire from your school. But It doesn't really matter where you go to law school. It doesn't really matter where you start out. Most people, if you concentrate in one practice area, you can always get into a better firm later on, especially a larger law firm. And just because you don't work at a summer associate is not going to hurt you. I know tons of attorneys. And when I say tons, thousands and thousands every year that I know of, they just get jobs in larger firms. And it's a very large market out there, and you should have no issues doing that in the long run. Even if you can't get a job initially, if you go to the best firm you can possibly get a job at and you specialize there and then move to another one, you can do fine. I know people that are at, not Cravath or Wachtell, the top 10 most prestigious firms in the country, and were able to get jobs there by lateraling in there and start, even though they started out small firms. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. I certainly appreciate it. And we will be doing this next week again. And again, I'm sorry for the technical issues as we got started today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.